After 3.5 years on the waitlist, I finally have a Rolex Submariner. I just bought it. But why? The Rolex Submariner has arguably the best history of any wristwatch ever made, from its lineage, which we'll cover, all the way up to how it's copied from Invicta, to its indices and how that's seen on every dive watch that's in existence basically these days, from its ability to bridge an aesthetic over the span of 70 years, and how it transitioned from a purpose-built device to a luxury icon ubiquitous with men's fashion and status. How does one watch do all that? Strap in and we'll cover why also I bought it. Number one, everyone knows it. And that can be a downside, which we'll cover, but why does everyone know it? Why does everyone know this design? If you showed this to a random person without the logo attached to it, how often do you think they'd be able to correctly identify the watch? While they may not know the exact model name, they know the look, the font, the bezel, the shapes on the dial. And it's not just because Rolex has sold, 500 million or however many Submariners over the last 70 years. It's because the model and the design is consistent all the way back to the beginning. If you forget model numbers and forget the endless rabbit hole of minor changes from a line under the word Submariner that collectors with crazy deep pockets salivate over, the 2-minute rundown of the history goes like this. 1926, Rolex had already made waterproof watches thanks to their oyster-designed cases. In 1932, Omega actually beat Rolex to the punch, creating the first ever commercially available dive watch with their Omega Marine, but it didn't have an external rotating bezel that we see on modern dive watches. So in 1953, the Blancpain 50 Fathoms is released just a few months before Rolex can release their dive watch, the Submariner. So the Blancpain is actually the first commercially released modern dive watch. A few months later in 1954, Rolex introduces the Submariner dive watch officially at Basel Fair, but it had a bidirectional friction bezel because Blancpain had the patent for the unidirectional bezel we all know today on every dive watch. So how did Rolex overcome being either second, third, or fourth, depending on your definition of a dive watch, to the party? We'll discuss that a bit. To get back into history, in 1959, the case increases to 40 millimeters, the crown guards are added, and the start of the real design aesthetic that we all know and love happens at that point in time. After 1959, most of the major alterations of the Submariner were either improved materials, updated movements, or minor revisions to the design. Otherwise, it would be the same watch. 1967, they switched from gilt to matte dials. In 1969, Rolex introduces the Submariner Date, which up until then it was a no-date model, and they also introduced the first gold Submariner. 1979, the first sapphire crystal is placed on a Submariner. In 1984, they switch from matte to gloss dials with white gold markers. There's also the first two-tone Submariner. 1988, they switch from 316L to 904L stainless steel. In 2010, the Cerachrome bezel, the ceramic bezel, and the super case design is introduced. And then in 2020, the case get redesigned to have thinner lugs again and to have a 41 millimeter case. But if you want more info on every reference between there, you can look in the description below. It's suffice to say the Submariner was not just popular, but it became an icon, one that really didn't change much at all over the last 70, 80 years. And this is crucial to how it's recognizable and to its success. How can you build a status symbol if everyone is changing that symbol every few years? See, that is the crucial part to the success. See, look at this image. What does that bring to mind? Well, it's the White House. It's the place the president lives. But what about this image? Does this look familiar at all? What about this image is familiar? What do you think it is? You see, the second image there is of the Parthenon, a place in Rome where they used to worship their gods. You see, well-known images develop a certain collective consciousness, and this is why governmental buildings are all designed like Roman buildings. They give the look of order and control, and dive watches that are designed with a rotating bezel and a dial that typically uses shapes for indices rather than numerals, well, it is the Submariner, right? This is why everyone says it looks like a Rolex when they see a model that is introduced by a different brand. It's hard to tap into that collective consciousness and have a watch that fits the typical design aesthetic without making it seem like it just looks like a different watch. Consistency here in their popularity is key. So, how did Rolex get popular? That's the thing. See, now I read this book. This book does a great job explaining Hans Wilsdorf's vision for the brand, and something in here struck me. He said only great marketing is needed to make a company successful, and market they did. There's certain simplicity to their design and consistency, but the messaging, that wasn't always like that. See, the marketing of Rolex is what made them popular. The ads that came from the Mad Men style era of advertising where they knew the feeling is all that sells a product. For example, take this ad. See, I'm never gonna wear a tuxedo. Almost 100% chance I won't wear one, or maybe a couple times, it'll be a handful of times. But this ad here makes me imagine myself as someone who wears a tuxedo and is also wearing something desirable. See, good marketing speaks to you. It's that voice that whispers in your ear that you can be more or do more if you just buy or have this. And so market he did. Rolex was on the wrists of so many people in dozens of popular moments in the early 20th century, from speed races to swimming the English Channel, which she actually failed, by the way, but it didn't stop Hans Wilsdorf from posting her face and her image and the watch all over the paper. From climbing Mount Everest to diving down to the Mariana Trench, Rolex has tried to make their mission to be a part of every large, achievable adventure of the early 20th century. And they created an aesthetic and design of it being rugged, that you can be someone just by buying this hunk of metal and gears. And what's crazy, which we can do in a different video, is how they transitioned from that to giving you the feeling that this watch isn't just for the adventure, but it's also a sign of status. And that is what I find fascinating. It set the tone for design language for majority of Rolex watches and watches from every other company. It's a fishing line through history that ties all the way back to the 50s. But is that the reason to buy it? I'll show you the specs as I discuss. For me, the main reason, realistically, is the marketing. Like, I'm not delusional enough to believe that if I knew nothing at all about watches, I would walk into a store and buy this particular one. Maybe I would, but this is simple. It has enough reflection and interest that I really find myself staring at it. It's much like my Rolex Explorer in that way, that it's a subtle elegance. It's like telling the rest of the world that you're just a normal guy, but when you look down, you see something shiny and solid. But I know that behind it all, the design aesthetic is a huge factor. The fact that it says Rolex Submariner and it has the history is huge. The shots of countless famous people that have worn it on their wrists is certainly influenced me, as though I will be like them, from Steve McQueen to Robert Downey Jr. to Robert Redford, or yes, James Bond. I also have a list of all the Bond films where the British agent wore the Rolex Submariner, in case you're interested. It's an icon that's been copied. See, I used to own an Invicta actually, and I still do have one right here. And I think just owning this, and I've had this for a long time, gave me the itch to wear a Rolex Submariner at some point in my life. But see, specifically, I wanted this version though. I wanted the no date, and it being cheaper is a huge plus. You know, I know that a lot of people make that decision for that reason, but mainly it's because the design, I think, is more direct link to the past. I think this is just iterations from the original. The date has been made in blue, green, yellow, white, gold, and basically everything in between. See, the no date sub is steel. It's built to be on a diver's wrist, which is why I plan to actually take it diving this year, so subscribe if you want to see that. And so for all those reasons, I plan to own this at some point in this hobby. I didn't think it'd take 3.5 years of my name on the wait list, but it has. And now that I've had it, it's reminding me why I wanted to be on the wait list in the first place. See, I really enjoy the 40.5mm case, because it's not really 41. And I'll discuss in a later video the sizing and how it compares to a 90s or 2000 Rolex cases, but I don't really have time today to do that. But I like the return from the super case to this different lug design. So I guess that leads into my likes and dislikes. What do I like about it? See, every watch has its honeymoon phase, and I'm in that right now. See, the upsides, I like the look. Specifically, I love the way the light reflects off the bezel. I love the size, and I love the feel of it. I love the legibility, the bezel action, and yes, the fact that when I look down, I see the same classic watch design that I've looked at for years. And yes, of course, that's a big part of it. I love the 70-hour power reserve. If you're used to 48-hour power reserves, the extra day is better than you expect. And unless you have a watch winder, then of course, obviously, if you're a watch winder, you don't care. The other thing I really like is the bezel action. I mean, listen to this for a little while. I tried to explain that to someone the other day. It's like a friction bezel where the spring is kind of just backing it up as it goes past the spring each time. Whereas most dive bezels, I can kind of feel each groove. So it's really unique in that way. It feels buttery with that like spring basically just being a tactile way to know you just moved past a step. I don't know if that, I do also really like the blue lume. You know, it's not a showstopper, but it's different and I kind of like that. And then the last one's the interchangeability. See, now this is a new model, so there's not a whole lot of different bezels out there for Submariners in general. But if you look at a lot of old Rolexes, like when you used to buy a GMT Master 2, they used to give you multiple different bezels so you could change it out yourself. Now, obviously not at that point now, but that is a benefit to a lot of Rolex models and the Submariner in general, because there's a lot of different bezels that are out there for these. That's also part of why the 16710, the GMT Master, is appealing to me, because you get 3 watches in one. Now, all these reasons make it a watch where if you're out there looking to buy one expensive watch and stop, this is a strong contender. And I'll be doing a follow-up video about other strong contenders, so subscribe also if you want to see that. But it's not without its downsides. The scratch magnet sides are my first big gripe with this. See, these Rolex sides have always been scratch magnets. I've had this for a week and I've already scratched the sides of this darn thing. And I was gentle for a few days. I even then noticed a few lines and micro scratches forming. It's just because they have these polished sides, which I really like the look of them, but man, oh man, do they scratch easy. Number 2 is obviously the price. Of course, it is expensive. You see, for $9,100 before tax, it's more than it was 3.5 years ago when I first joined the waitlist, and it'll continue to go up in price. That's a huge downside for anyone watching this in the future. It is expensive. We can get into Rolex pricing and watch pricing in general in a different video. Third big downside about Rolex, I guess in general, is the waitlist. You know, I put my name on the list 3.5 years ago because I wanted to wear it for my wedding because it was gonna be on the beach, but I forgot about it because it was so long ago, and I'm not someone that really like hounds my dealer to make sure that they give me the watch or give me the opportunity to buy the watch. So I forgot, and so when they called, I was really surprised. It was totally out of the blue, and I didn't expect to have this in my hand today. And I'm not someone that buys other watches just to get a shot at one. So eventually they called. So if you're out there on a wait list, eventually they will probably call, but it still sucks. You know, if you want to celebrate a moment, you can't go in and buy the watch you want, which it's just, that's a crappy part about it. You know, it's the same thing with a lot of other luxury good providers. So it isn't just Rolex. Cars are like that. Purses are like that. You know, and I understand it from a business sense, but I still don't have to like it. Number 4 is the commonality of the watch. See, now everyone has it. And sometimes that bothers me a bit, but most of the time, I just don't care. You see, some people might care though, and it's equivalent to the suburban mom who loves Starbucks. But if she likes it, she should be able to like it. That's kind of how I feel about this. The 5th thing is the weight of the bracelet. That's a downside for me because this is a chunky beast. You know, anytime I run or move or do anything, I can feel the crown digging into the back of my hand. I move around my warehouse all the time, and I can feel the bracelet moving around. I'm just not used to this heavy of a bracelet. I've got the scale on there so you can see the weight of the head of the watch and the weight of the bracelet. And sometimes that makes this uncomfortable. But obviously that's personal preference. I'm just not used to this. I definitely couldn't wear a solid gold version of this. And for me, that's kind of a detractor. So I've been wearing this without the bracelet, even though I love the look of it on the bracelet. Number 6 is probably just like the versatility and the monochrome nature of it. So now I love black everything. I love black dials with black bezels, with black everything. You know, most of my watches are pretty standard like that. I like it because I'm willing to put it on anytime, anywhere, and I never have to think much about it. That's why I don't have very many colors in my collection. But I think for a lot of people that's a downside. And for me, I think that's a downside only in the fact that over time, that means it kind of blends in and it can kind of get outshone over time. Kind of like my Grand Seiko here. You know, this watch has such an incredible dial that I can't imagine looking at it one day and saying, I'm kind of bored with it. Whereas this monochrome classic look, I could see people eventually saying I'm kind of bored with it. And so that's obviously a downside as well. And the last one has to be the lug width. See, the 21mm spacing is a bummer. I would have taken a 40mm case with the same thinner lugs and a 20mm bracelet, but that's not what they make these days. And it's kind of a pain, but now I have 2 watches, the Grand Seiko and this with 21mm straps. So maybe I'll just bolster my 21mm strap library. So that's the Submariner. I'm gonna have to sit on this for a little while, but what do you guys think? Let me know down below. Peace.